Thank you. My name is Gary Scudder. I'm a professor here in the COR, ably assisted by the excellent Kristen Wolf, who's running the camera today because she refuses to film on herself, so this is how she earns her keep as a junior faculty member. What I want to talk about today is a series of reflections on COR 270, Heroines and Heroes, which I've taught several times. It may be my favorite class at Champlain College, and I really like this class. So what I want to talk about briefly are 5 concepts when I think about COR 270, Heroines and Heroes. First off, the whole dynamic between Western and non-Western. Because this class is in the second year, technically it is a Western class. Although I think I tend to use a lot of non-Western material, and this is true of all the second year classes I teach. I always bring a lot of non-Western stuff in, not only because it is, I think, more my area of specialization and certainly my area of passion, but also I think, how do you begin to understand the West unless you understand what makes the West unique, for better or worse? So I do the same thing in aesthetic expression. I bring a lot of non-Western in. So I tend to have a lot of non-Western Heroines and Heroes, which I think is perfectly justifiable because you're supposed to be making the classes fit your own interests. So I'm saying that's by way of introduction. Secondly, the use of the Barry book on literary theory. I use Barry in a very, very specific way. I think I use 5 or 6 chapters from Barry relating to different ways to interpret literature. And what I tend to do is this. I'm a big believer in learn a theory, use a theory. Learn a theory, use a theory. So what I tend to do is I'll have a chapter in Barry on, say, narratology or Marxist literary criticism, and say the class meets, on a Friday. So the next class it's supposed to meet is a Tuesday. So I tend to introduce the theory and actually discuss the Barry book at the second meeting of the week. And then by the next time, which is either going to be 4 or 5 days later, they have to write a paper, let's say a 3 or 4 page paper on a short story where they specifically use that theory to analyze that story. So you're learning a theory and immediately you use a theory. For example, the chapter in Barry on narratology. The following meeting they have to write a 3 or 4 page paper on Anderson's The Little Mermaid. Not the Disney version, the actual one. For psychoanalytical criticism, we turn around and write a paper on the short story Death from Winesburg, Ohio, which, as we all know, all right-thinking individuals know, it's the greatest American novel. For feminist literary criticism, they write a paper on A Temporary Matter, that amazing short story from Lahiri's Interpreter of Maladies. On Marxist literary criticism, they write a paper on the last section, or the third ghost of A Christmas Carol from Dickens, who, is, again, as all right-thinking individuals know, is the greatest writer of all time. For lesbian gay criticism, which is not one of the required literary choices, but the one I use anyway. In the past, they have written a paper on Cut Sleeve, which is a homoerotic Chinese ghost story from the classic Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio collection. Though I think this time I'm going to switch it to actually an Arab story called A Worthless Woman by Al-Sheikh, which I think is really, really good. But again, learn a theory, use a theory right away. So we have a whole series of those. They take up most of the first half of the semester. Because my thinking is you can't really begin to analyze the bigger issue of your hero or heroine unless you understand his literary theories. Thirdly, we also have to read Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces, which I also use in a very specific way. I set aside 3 weeks for examining Campbell. And what I do is divide it up based on his 3 divisions. Is that, if you're familiar with Campbell, as we all are, there is the departure part of the journey, the initiation part of the journey, and the return. So what I tend to do is give the students a specific oral presentation they have to give based on their heroine or hero that they have chosen. So say it's week 1 and we're talking about departure. We spend the first class meeting of the week talking about Campbell and what specifically did he say about departure. The second meeting, the students will talk about their particular heroine or hero, the one they're writing the big paper on that they've chosen, and how that heroine or hero relates to Campbell on departure. So again, learn a theory, use a theory. The second week, it is the initiation week. So the first class meeting, we talk about what does Campbell say about initiation and the different stages. And then the second class meeting, student presentations on their particular hero or heroine and the initiation stage. And the third week, naturally enough, it's the same thing, except we do it in regards to the return. That tends to work very well because they like Campbell anyway, but this makes them, it also works because it makes them start thinking about analyzing their hero and heroine, so don't wait till the last week. Fourth, we get to choose one other big reading, and I always use the Ramayana, not the entire Ramayana, which we know is like this big. I use Barry's retelling of the Ramayana, which I don't think is the best one, but it tends to be very accessible. And there's some clunker things about it, but we use it anyway. I chose it even though, again, it's not in Western because it is such a rich, even the short retelling, which is 500 pages long, even the short retelling of it is remarkably rich, remarkably complex. Rama is such a quintessential hero, but also a guy with extraordinary flaws. But also because, and the beauty of this is you get to get into Sita, Rama's long-suffering wife, who gets treated remarkably badly at the end of the epic. So you really get into, so when you think about feminist literary criticism, or for that matter, Marxist, the student can just run amok with their analysis of Rama and Sita. And for that matter, the whole notion of good versus evil, which is much more complex than a non-Western work. Because there is not the duality of good and evil in the Indian world. There's sort of Dharma versus a-Dharma. So they have to write a big paper on that. Finally, I also have them watch and write a paper on Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. So we take literally a week out of class and watch the entire ballet. And they have to write a paper analyzing the ballet, because I want them to start thinking about all the different ways you can analyze. And, you know, can you literally use the same criteria for studying a heroine or hero if it is in dance and there are literally no words spoken, and the complexity of this, and especially the use of symbols. So anyway, those are just some thoughts off the top of my head about COR 270. Again, it's a class I love. If anyone would like to sit down and talk about it, I would be more than happy to. So that's what I have. Thank you.